today I want to talk about direnv and Nix and how they. So direnv is a tool I built, and Nix, you know Nix, and I want to show how they integrate together and the nice things about both of these tools. And so the plan is to have just a quick intro to direnv, what it is, what it does, and then talk about the Nix integration, and then we can maybe do a little workshop, or I don't know, like. So what is direnv? So direnv is a language agnostic environment switcher, and so basically what it does is solves my own problem, which is I check out a lot of GitHub repos, and I tend to work with a lot of different open source stuff, and I found out that I didn't want to use RVM for Ruby, and then like the virtualenv for Python, and then every time you have a different language, you need this new tool, right? And so I was thinking, maybe I can build my own tool that solves the problem for once and for all, And so that's where I built direnv. And so direnv is a Go program. It's just a one binary, and it kind of hooks into your shell, and it monitors where you're at, and if you change directory, it just looks if there is a envarc and loads it in bash, and then exports the diff to the shell, basically. But I'm gonna go more into details. So if you want to install direnv, it's available on NixOS, Homebrew, Debian. I never managed to find somebody who does a Red Hat package, so if you feel like it, just let me know. And then once it's installed, you just have to add something like this to your bash RC or Z shell. And what it does, it sets up the hook. So every time you enter the prompt, it's gonna execute. And I just want to go a little bit more in detail, because I think understanding how it works helps just with the usage on the day-to-day. So that's what happens on every prompt. And this is a simplified version. So basically it checks, it looks for envarc in the current folder and parent folders. If it finds one, it checks if the envarc is allowed to execute. If it's allowed, then it looks if the envarc has already been loaded. If it hasn't been loaded, which is, so this one is wrong. So it checks if the file has changed. If the file has changed or it hasn't been loaded, then it's going to unload any previous environment if there is, and then it's going to load the new environment. And then it collects all of this and spits like a diff to the shell that's going to evaluate it. And that's how the environment gets updated on every prompt, basically. If nothing's going to change, it's just going to be a no up.
What does it mean for it to be allowed?
So I'm going to explain there's this, yeah, no problem, it's cool. There's a security mechanism that just makes sure if you git clone a repo and there's an envarc that runs rm-rf, you don't want this to execute. So there's a little security framework for this. So what does it do when it loads the envarc? So the envarc is a bash file, but first it sets up a couple of things. It sets up the standard library, which is a couple of utility functions that are useful in the context of envarc. And then it looks for either using the XDG spec in this folder, it looks for this file, or if it doesn't exist for this file, it loads it, and this lets you have kind of user-wide functions and things like that that you might want to develop because they're not in the stdlib. And then it sources the env and then it calculates the diff. And so just a quick demo. So let's say you check out a project. I don't know. Maybe, do you have any project in mind? It might be already checked out. I didn't really think this through.
Python requests should be only have url-free as a dependency.
So, what's the? Is it on GitHub?
Yeah. Well, like you can clone it from GitHub.
So let's see. Is there a GitHub link somewhere?
For the repository in GitHub, there was a link for that. Yeah, contribute. Second point.
This one. Okay. So I just have a little utility because I check out a lot of repos. Okay, so we have this this repo, and what we want is to use the maybe virtualenv to kind of load the. So what I do is direnv edit dot, and what it creates is opens the env in your editor, which is an environment variable, and then layout Python. And what this does is this is part of the stdlib, and it sets up. I think it's not available. Alright. Okay, so now what we have is we have virtualenv set up in this subfolder. And so if you do pip install, I don't know if it's something. Well, basically everything is going to end up in this virtualenv. And if you go out of the repo, it unloads the environment. So now if I go back into, you can see it sets the virtualenv environment variable, which points to this subfolder. And so automatically you have all your project dependencies, which are kind of scoped to the folder. And now if I move to another Python project or another Ruby project, etc., then it's just automatically managed. Do you have any questions or?
Have you shown already the security feature you were talking about?
No, it's coming later. Yeah. Not library. So basically what happens is I have my own direnv, and then after a while when I find something's useful, I kind of import it to direnv. And you're welcome to kind of do the same, right? So I have layouts for Ruby, Python, Node, PHP, Haskell, and I think that's it. But
if you want to
have a look, so the C dependency is like a thing on its own, but I think here we have Python is just a wrapper, right? So if you look at it, oh, okay, it's so it seems like it's just a copy, so it should work.
So if you literally try to do it Python and then import SQLite, will it work?
Is the SQLite part of the standard?
SQLite free? Maybe, yeah. Yeah, that's the problem. And you can obviously fix it if you
I have an answer for you, but it's gonna come later. Did you have a question? So I just, sorry? Yeah, good. So layout is just like a dispatcher, and then dispatch to layout underscore name functions. So just because it's a bit vanity, but basically this is the same as this.
Okay.
And I just realized I didn't show, like, the most basic example would be if you want to set you want to add the bin folder in your project maybe to the path. So we would just do something like this. And now if I look at the path, we have the bin folder over here. So that's just like the most simple version. And then because you don't want to mess up the path, because if you forget to add, for example, this bit, it can be a bit problematic. So there's a path add feature that just expands the path and just does everything for you. All right. So that's the demo. And then just for the stdlib, so the doc is not super nice to read, but you can find there's like a has function that just checks if something is in the path. There's we support OCaml as well. There's the different layouts, and then another layout, or just build your own function that doesn't use direnv. Yeah. Okay, and so the security framework. So basically, every time before it loads the envarc, it checksums the envarc with the path, and there is a folder in your home that's here. And all these files are just checksums, and if they exist, it means you're allowed, and if they don't exist, you're not allowed.
Is it checksum of the content or checksum of the path?
Both. So if I remove, so I can do direnv deny. Now I'm not allowed to load the envarc. If I do direnv allow, now I can load it. And if I'm denied and I edit the file and I save it, then I assume you've read the file. And so again, you can load it. And so if you just do direnv edit all the time, so you depend on direnv to open the file, then you don't have to worry about this usually. That's it.
Do you have a way of garbage collection?
Direnv prune. This removes the old envarc. Yeah.
How does it know which ones are old?
The file contains the path, so it's gonna go do a reverse. Should we take a break, or I don't think it took long enough, so we could just. Yes. stdlib is written with a lot of bashism, like bash arrays and things like that. It's a good question, because I mean the envarc files, I could use Lua or maybe something else, but for some reason I decided bash was the best, because it's available in most Linux systems. Really hard to beat the succinctness of bash, I think. You know, like if you were to write the envarc with any other scripting language, you'd do something like export, and then you would have to quote the stuff, you know, something like this. I don't know. And then here you can run any arbitrary code, so you could do fancy stuff, and yeah. Like I was considering Lua, but then I need to add all the extensions, and it limits the system.
How common is it for you or others to run commands instead of simply setting the file?
like the most complicated stuff. Yeah, usually it's pretty simple, but I don't know. It's just nice to be able to do kind of external commands and things like that. All right, so direnv solves like the environment variables, and it loads the environment and unloads the environment. But then you always have this problem that if you use RVM or virtualenv, then you have the C dependencies, and so what you do, like you install them on your system-wide or user-wide, and ideally you would like to have them per project, right? And that's where Nix comes in, basically. And I don't have a definite answer, but I have two implementations, and I just wanted to show them to you. So the first one is just using the Nix shell. And what it does, it shells out it runs the Nix shell, and then within the shell, it dumps the environment, and then it's reloaded in direnv, and then that's how it can keep track of the diff, basically. So if you go, for example, on my talk, you can see this is everything that's exported from the Nix shell. So it's a bit heavy, you know, and sometimes it likes to set the SSL certificate path to dev null or something. But it works, like it's pretty nice. And so basically here, all I have in the envarc is use Nix, and use is again another dispatcher. And then if I look at the shell.nix, no, I just have a default.nix. So that's just a standard derivation, and everything is imported from there. So now, for example, I need ASCII doc and Java in this one, so I can just run make, and ASCII doc is there. So it's been added on the path. And the other approach is to use the nixenv profiles. So you can create custom profiles where you install your stuff in it. And so the difference would be you could do nix profile, and then I think you just do ASCII doctor, for example. So that's for quick one-offs where I don't want to write the default.nix or anything. I can just do this, and now it's set inside of the direnv folder. There's a nix profile folder, and then here you have ASCII doctor, and it just sets the path to this folder, and that's it. Forgot to ask to repeat the questions. So the question is if I see any advantages between
the second
approach compared to the first one. So the second approach is much cleaner in terms of our environment changes. You can see here it just sets these environment variables. The downside is that you just set a fixed set of environment variables, whereas with the Nix shell you can each package you add as a build dependency can inject its own environment variables. That's basically the difference. Yeah. So the question is it in a subshell once I've loaded? The subshell, capture the diff, and then import the diff into your current shell. So you don't, otherwise you could just run Nix shell, right? And then you have a subshell. Whereas here you just cd into the folder, and then you just cd back into something else, and you just like move around like that. Yes? Do I have to run my Nix shell? No, you don't. you can just cd into the folder and then cd out, and that's it. Yes?
So I haven't used Nick shell, but I've used geeks.
Is it possible to integrate Greeks with direnv? And
I've done it when doing it like this, but I was wondering if this just you could just like.
no, Nextshell doesn't really dump the path alterations, so that's why I had to resort to this thing. Basically, you can see there's a left-hand side that kind of captures the right-hand side, but if I could just eval the changes, it would be fine as well.
Might try doing that.
Yeah. All right. So I might just mention one downside of both approaches, which is that if you update your channel and then you have a vector ops or like a pingdom, and you have to quickly go into your projects because you need it to do some operations, and suddenly it downloads lots of stuff because you depend on the state of the world. That's a downside. So you don't have a really good control on exactly the dependency sets. Well, actually, you could set, for example, make another next packages checkout and then export the next path to something like this, and then the path to the next packages, and then make sure this one is only updated before you at a good time, basically. So I think there's a third approach, which will be to use the my-env fun or something like that. But then you have to install it into your environment, and yeah.
What does direnv
direnv edit just opens the file it looks for the editor environment variables, pass the path of the file to the editor, and then waits for the editor to terminate, and when it terminates, it allows the file if the file has changed, basically.
So if I open it and then close it without saving it, nothing will be updated?
Nothing will happen. There's also a feature of direnv which is file tracking. So, for example, when you do useNext, it automatically tracks the changes of your default.next as well. So if you edit this one and maybe add, I don't know, maybe you want to add Ruby, and then I add Ruby here, and now it's automatically reloads the environment, and Ruby is available, or maybe this, yeah.
I missed a little bit at the beginning.
Can we use the -- like a pure version? And I think the answer is yes and no. You could you could wipe your environment and then just export the new environment. But the thing is, I like to have Vim available in my environment, and usually I like to have something that's more like an addition to the existing environment because of that. If this version of direnv, I hard set the path of bash in during compile time in NixOS. So even if you mess up the path, it's still able to find the direnv in the bash. So yeah. All right. Beer.